Good evening, JW kids. I'm so glad that you are with us for our YouTube book club again this year. This year we are reading a book called The Outsider by Katy Morgan. I'm really excited to share this book with you. It is a retelling of the story of Ruth. Now, Ruth was a real person who really did live way, way, way back in history. And you can find her actual story, the real nonfiction story, in the Bible, in the book of Ruth. But we're going to read this, which is a novel, and it's a retelling of the book of Ruth. I'm going to tell you after each evening, as we're going to read 3 chapters a night through the month of October on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And at the end of those chapters, I'm going to kind of explain to you a little bit of what was really happening in Ruth's story, what actually happened, and which things are just made up for the purpose of this story. But first, I want to show you the map that is in the very beginning of the book. It shows the land of Israel. This map is full of real places because the story you're about to read is based on a true one, found in the book of Ruth in the Old Testament part of the Bible. If at any stage you want to know more about the history that lies behind this book, turn to page 159. There are accompanying notes for each chapter. That's what I'm going to be reading at the end of each chapter. Thank you so much to T.Y. Oyakali for reading to us tonight. So let's jump right in to chapter 1.
My mother-in-law's mouth was as wrinkled as a prune. Right then, she was pursing her lips, so the deep grooves around them were especially obvious. I think she's paused them too many times, and it got stuck that way. Her forehead was furrowed as well. Her eyes were fierce. "Go home," she said again. "You are not coming with me." But I shook my head. Naomi wasn't going to have her way this time. I looked back. Oprah was already a dark figure disappearing in the half-grown valley. It was just after dawn, and the light was still low, making my friend's shadow long and black as she walked back towards our village. My mother-in-law interpreted my backwards glance as hesitation. "Go with her," she said insistently. "Go back to your own people. Go home." But I stood my ground. I didn't care that Naomi was much older than me. I didn't care that I was supposed to do what she said. It was for her own good. I pursed my lips, just like her. "Don't urge me to leave you," I said. "Don't urge me to turn back." The lines around Naomi's mouth deepened. I put my hand on her arm, wishing I could get across everything I was feeling. "Where you go," I said firmly, "I will go." I stared at her. She stared at me. The day I first saw Naomi was 10 years before that. It was the day my third sister was born. I was 12 years old, and I had woken early that morning to find myself being shooed out of the house by my aunts. "Ruth, get up," one of them shouted at me. "The baby is coming." She was pulling the blankets away from where they twisted around my body in sleep. My other aunt forced my hand open and shoved a chunk of bread into it, then yanked me upright. "No place for you here," she said, flapping at me to tell me to go out. I shook my head slowly, still sleepy. "I'm old enough. I should stay with Ma." "Out, out," my aunts cried again, in unison this time. "Take your brother with you. Ramina and Amam have already gone." I looked down at my sister's empty bed on the ground. Usually, we had to pile up the bedrolls and fold the blankets neatly each morning to make space for everything else the room was used for during the day. But now, Ramina and Amam's blankets lay in a crumpled heap, just like mine. Beck, the youngest and the only boy, was crouched in a corner, sucking his thumb. His eyes were big as he watched my aunt. I held out my hand, and he grabbed my fingers in a small, slobbery fist. "Oh," I said, and swung him up onto my hip instead. "Out," said the nearest aunt again, but she was distracted this time. Deep groans were coming from the tiny room where my parents slept. The new baby really was on its way. "Out." My aunt gave me a little shove and then hurried out of the room. Obediently, I held back, tight, and headed in the opposite direction. The sunlight took me by surprise. I blinked and I stepped back for a moment, losing my balance and making my brother bang his head on my shoulder. The goat snickered at me from our position, tethered to a tree just outside the house. I wrinkled my nose back at her. "The joke's on you," I said, sticking my tongue out. I was the one who was free to go wherever I wanted for once. I hardly ever got sent out of the house like this without some sort of errand. Nobody would want me back for hours now that my aunts had taken over, and when I really thought about it, I definitely didn't want to be around for the birth. But what to do with a day of freedom? First, I had to do something with Beck, who was now getting his slimy fingers all over my hair. I put him down hurriedly. "You need looking after for the day, don't you?" "I know. How about we go and see Dinah?" "Die," he answered cheerfully, and so on we toddled across the village. It was a small place, our village, just a bunch of mud brick houses cramped together in a loose circle. Our house sat on the top of a low rise of ground from which you could see for miles across the wide, flat plain of Moab. Everything felt fresh and good that morning. Not that I'd got used to being awake. The sun was shining, the cold weather was behind us, and the spring rains had made everything green. The houses looked snug and neat in the early sunshine, except the house next to ours. That belonged to the widow Zoela, and it was dirty and crumbling. As Beck and I dawdled past, I noticed that the long cracks in one of its walls had tiny pink and white flowers growing in them. "Flower," said Beck, meaning flowers. He reached towards them, but I dragged him away. I was sure those cracks were getting wider. We found Dinah sitting on a stool in the little courtyard outside her house. She was twisting a fuzz of wood around one end of a long stick, ready to spin it into yarn. But she set it down, and I came near and lifted her cheeks so that I could kiss her. "Ma is giving birth right now," I said. My aunt sat there. Dinah nodded. "She'll be well then. A strong woman anyways, your mother." Beck was reaching out his chubby hands to be lifted onto her lap. She helped him up. "Your arrival didn't give her much trouble, did it, Beck boy? So this new baby won't either." I shuddered. Beck's birth had sounded like quite a lot of trouble to me. "We must pray that it will be another boy," Dinah added, nodding towards the shrine that stood in the opposite corner of her courtyard. "We've been praying that every day," I told her. "Please, great God, give us a healthy, strong boy who will keep the family line going and look after our parents in their old age. We've said it every single day." "Good girl," Dinah smiled. "Now I suppose you're not welcome at home for a while. I just sent Oprah off to the well, and she has work to do after she comes back. But if you help her for a while, I think I can spare her for the rest of the morning. She raised her eyebrows knowingly. And I can keep Beck with me. Beck said, die, enthusiastically. So that was that. Soon I was running to find Oprah, Dinah's daughter and my best friend. It was during that morning of freedom that we would first meet Naomi. Oprah and I wandered down through the fields where the barley stalks were now well above ankle height. Race you, I shouted as soon as we reached the first field boundary to the last marker. We're not allowed to go that far, Oprah stuttered after me. But I was already flying, my arms outstretched like the bird's wings. Come on, I called. I'm leaving you behind, and with satisfaction I heard her sandals begin to thump hard against the earth as she took on speed. Oprah had longer legs than me, but I was almost as fast as her, and with my head start, I thought I could win. I was laughing, grinning. The hair and the green barley and the sun and the sky were like one big gulp of cool, delicious water. My hastily braided hair was coming undone, but I didn't mind. Oprah was still behind me, and my mother and aunts were even farther away. Nobody could tell me what to do. I was free. I'd passed the boundary marker already, and there was the final one ahead of me, a big chunk of gray stone that looked like a crouching man with a hood over his head. Sometimes people left offerings to the god on it. A jug of oil or a grain cake perched on it flapped up like a hat. But not today. I'd always wanted to touch the boundary stone. We weren't supposed to go as far as this, it was true. We were out of sight of most of the village. Dinah would have said that we were running the risk of being outside the protection of the village gods. But personally, I'd never seen what there was to be scared of. I was nearly there now, and Oprah was getting close behind me. I grunted, forcing my legs to go faster. I wanted to win. Oprah gave a sudden shriek. Ruth! Don't put me off! I panted, pushed myself forward, then I shrieked too. The stone was moving. I skidded to a halt, lost my footing and crashed to the dusty ground. Ruth! Cried Oprah again, catching up. Her hand scrabbled at me as she pulled me to my feet. The stone, I said, spinning round to look at it again. They are strangers, she hissed, clutching me. And so they were. The marker hadn't moved. Someone had stared behind it. Another someone by its side. Their grave cloaks had made them blend in with the stone. But now we could see them, 4 of them, 4 strangers, 4 complete strangers, right in front of us. Oprah and I took a step back. The closest was a man, straightening up now and towering over us. His gray hair was covered with a faded cap. Next to him were 2 boys, both tall, both very thin. They were staring at us. And then there was her. Naomi's billowing dress hid the thinness of her body, but her face was bony and her lips were cracked. She must have been very hungry and very exhausted. Yet even then, even the first time I met her, those sharp eyes were looking us up and down, and those lips were pursed in disapproval. Instinctively, I straightened my dusty clothes and smoothed my loose hair back behind my ear. So these are Moabites, Naomi said crisply. Her husband sighed. His sigh turned into a cough, and he bent double for a moment. His whole body jerking with the effort his lungs were making. Oprah moved a little closer to me. Naomi's expression was softening, though. She rubbed her husband's back, helping him to straighten up as the coffin fit came to an end. Then she looked at us again. Girls, she said slowly, we're very hungry. We are looking for work and a place to live. Does the village have room for us? Her words sounded strange. Her words sounded strange, She wasn't from Moab. That was for sure. She was Ammonite, like the traders who came from the north sometimes and bought dried herbs and flowers from Dinah. Was she a nomad from the south? We are Ephrathites from Judah, said Naomi. And if she'd heard my thoughts, Ephra, I repeated uncertainly, not knowing the words. Ephratah is our town. Judah is our tribe. She glanced at her husband. Israel is our people. Oprah and I looked at each other. My friend's forehead was puckered up with worry. Israelite, she hissed at me. We knew a few things about Israelites. First, and most importantly, they worship different gods to us. To be exact, they worship only one God, and they claim that none of the gods were gods at all. It was hardly believable, but Oprah swore that it was true. A merchant at her mother's house had told her. We also knew the Israelites had fought against us Moabites. There had been disputes about the borders of our lands. I'd heard the old men in the village talk about it sometimes when they sat at the edge of the field at harvest time and gossiped. If only the Israelites had never come here out of the wilderness, they said, we'd all be living like kings. So did our village have room for a family of our old enemies? And worn out looking ones at that, who possibly had diseases and possibly had no money. Maybe not. Yet, there was something about Naomi. I couldn't have said what it was exactly. I just knew that I wanted to know her. So I said, yes, I'm sure there's room, and gestured towards the village. Her cracked lips smiled. She took her husband's arm. This is Elimelech, my husband, she told us proudly. I am Naomi, and this, she waved at the two boys, and they slunk forward. These are my son, Marlon and Killian. Oprah let out an embarrassed giggle at being introduced to two older boys like that. I remained serious and important. It's this way, I said, turned around and marched off. We paced back towards home with them, all struggling behind us. They went much slower than us, partly because of all their baggage, but also because we were young and strong, while they were exhausted from their long journey and their hunger. One of the boys didn't even have sandals on, just strips of cloth wrapped around his feet. No wonder he couldn't go faster. But I barely noticed that. I felt like some kind of war captain bringing spoil home from a battle. All thoughts of my mother giving birth back at home had been left far behind. This was much more interesting. Israelites, Dinah demanded sharply, looking from me to Opera to the poverty-stricken newcomers behind us. Israelites? I opened my mouth to speak in the stranger's defense, then closed it again. Dinah was raising her eyebrows. She was scared when she raised her eyebrows. Well, she asked. They, I began, but fell silent. I glanced at the Israelites' boys. They both had their gaze trained firmly on their feet. Oprah was twisting her arm together behind her back as if that would somehow make her disappear. Then Naomi paused her lips. She adjusted the shawl that lay over her hair. She stepped forward. We just want to leave, she said clearly, looking Dinah in the eyes. We asked for shelter. We can work. We want to work. We are not cursed or diseased. We are not outlawed. We're just hungry. Dinah folded her arms. Why did you leave Israel? She asked suspiciously. There's a famine, Naomi answered at once. Not enough to eat. The harvest failed last year, and it will fail again this year. She glanced at her husband, Elimelech. And we had no choice but to leave. Dinah frowned. Bad land, then? No, cried Naomi angrily. Our land isn't bad. It was given to us by God. It's been ours for generations. It's good land. But it has famine, Dinah shrugged. Well, maybe you're just bad farmers and that's why. Naomi stayed silent at this. She pressed her lips together. I thought maybe that meant her husband was a bad farmer, but she didn't want to say so. Do you have money? Asked Dinah abruptly. Can you pay your way? We can pay, Elimelech spoke up, managing not to cough as he nodded. Well, then yes, you can sleep in my courtyard for a night or two. 2 coins per night. How does that sound? And if your boys do some work for my husband. Dinah paused, looking the 2 boys up and down. I looked too. They both had short hair, dark hair, slightly bulging eyes, and thin cheeks. Marlon was about a head taller. He must be 14 or so, I guess. Nearly a grown man. His brother, Killian, looked to be closer to us in age, but he had the same bony, hardened frame as his brother. They had different noses, though. Marlon's was straight and narrow like his father. Killian's was wider like his mother's. There was hardly any boy in our village, none at all, that were a similar age to Oprah and me. I quite liked the thought of getting to know some. Dinah was nodding. If your boys do some work for my husband and he approve of what they do, then maybe I'll let you stay longer. Maybe. That was the best the Israelites were going to get. Midway came, and there was a word from home. My 2 sisters, Remina and Amam, had turned up in tears, saying they thought Ma was going to die. Either that or the new baby would. It took me ages to calm them down, and as soon as I had, Beck decided that now was just the right time for him to become red in the face and start wailing about nothing at all. I'd wanted to come to the Israelite women to find out about Israel. What did it mean that their God had given them their land? And did they really worship only one God? And what were they going to do now that they were in Moab? But there had been no time. At last, my siblings lay snoozing quietly in the shade. I took a few steps towards Naomi, framing my questions in my mind. Naomi, I began. Ruth, come here, called Dinah. I stopped. Oprah's mother was stirring a big pot of stew over the fire. It's time to give the gods their offering, she said. Come and say a prayer for your mother and the baby. The family shrine stood in the center of the wall at one end of the courtyard opposite the house. It was a big slab of stone with a rectangular recess cut into the middle of it. In the recess stood the icons, together with a couple of oil lamps and the remains of a previous offering. There were 4 of the little figures made of stone and wood. The great god, Shemosh, stood in the center. His was the one that was carved with the most detail. Then there was the lady by his side, made of cedar wood, painted in bright colors. To the left was the ox god, who Dinah said looked after our village and protected the fields. And on the right was the gods of the household. Dinah handed me a small clay dish full of steaming stew. But as I stepped towards the shrine to give the gods the offering, I heard a mutter from one of the Israelite boys. "There is one there. That's just a rock," he said scornfully. I stopped. Dinah heard it too. "What did you say?" she demanded. It was the younger of the two boys who'd said it, Killian. I could tell because a blush was spreading all over the way across his snub nose and sunken cheeks. He looked scared and didn't say anything. "That rock," said Dinah angrily, "is a holy thing. It fell from the heaven. My husband's great-grandfather saw it. It comes from the gods." Killian still looked scared, but Naomi stood up to defend him. "You can worship such God if you want," she said crisply. "We don't." She and Dinah stared at each other. "Don't pretend you're something special," Dinah stared. "Plenty of Israelites worship other gods. They make offerings just like everybody else. I've met the traders who sell them the statues." "Well, those Israelites aren't true Israelites," Naomi replied stiffly. "We worship one God, the God who made the heavens and the earth, the God who gave us our land." The two women stared at each other again. I was worried. I was sure Dinah wouldn't want people like that under her roof. It was too risky. The gods might get angry. She was going to kick the Israelites out. I could just feel it coming, but I wanted them to stay. They were my Israelites. I was the one who had found them and brought them here, and I had a lot of questions that I wanted the answers to. I gazed from Naomi to Dinah and back again, barely noticing how tightly I was holding the clay dish in my hands. Then, in the corner, Elimelech stood up shakily. "Wife," he said to Naomi, "we are not in Israel anymore." He went up to the shrine and knelt down. "Please welcome us," he said to the idols on the lintel, and he kissed the stone. There was a moment of silence. Elimelech coughed as he straightened up again and went back to his corner, not looking at his wife or sons. Dinah smiled in satisfaction. "There we go. Not that hard." Then she looked at me. "Go on, Ruth. Make your offering." Not meeting Naomi's gaze, I hurried forward and knelt down in front of the shrine just as Elimelech had done. I placed the dish of stew in front of the gods. "Great gods," I mumbled, "I give you this gift of food. In return, please keep my mother from harm and her baby. May it be born healthy. May it live," I paused. "May it be a boy to continue the family line." I kissed the stone just like always. Then I sneaked a glance at Naomi. She was looking at me with a strange expression. It wasn't angry or even disapproving. It was sad. I was like she thought. There was something I was missing out on. It was like she thought there was something I was missing out on.
I think it's true that Naomi was sad when she saw Ruth worshiping a fake god, worshiping a rock instead of the one true God. There sure was something that Ruth was missing out on, and she's going to learn about the one true God the more she gets to know Naomi. In the first scene in this chapter, it's taken from Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 to 18, but it's just a taster for now. We'll come back to it later. There's a lot in these first 6 chapters that I had to invent. That's the author speaking. Ruth and Orpah were real people, but everything else about their families and the village is made up based on what we know about what life was like in those times. In the book of Ruth, we only meet Ruth as an adult, but we know that Naomi and her family stayed in Moab for a total of 10 years. At some point in that time, spoiler alert, Ruth gets married. We don't know when exactly, so I've imagined that the Israelites first arrived when Ruth was 12. Several years will pass before Ruth gets married, and then several more years before the scene at the start of chapter 1 of this book. In chapter 2, Ephrathah was a name for one town in Bethlehem. Originally, it may have been the name of a village near Bethlehem. So if someone was an Ephrathite, it meant they came from Bethlehem. The Moabites lived on the eastern side of the Dead Sea. Several conflicts between the Moabites and the Israelites happened in the same approximate time period as the story of Ruth. However, these are not mentioned in the book of Ruth, so I've assumed that the story took place during the time of peace. Even so, it's clear that in general, Israelites and Moabites did not get on at all. In the events of chapter 3, it's entirely invented. I thought it was important to show something about Moabite religion and how it was different to the Israelites' beliefs. We know that the Moabites worshipped the god Shamash, but since people in those times generally worshipped lots of gods, I've described several here. It might have seemed strange to worship a stone, but this really happened in the ancient world. Most often, people used human-made figurines to represent their gods, but there's also a lot of evidence for uncarved stones being used. Some of them were probably meteorites, which is why Dinah says that the stone in her shrine fell from the sky. The Bible is clear that the God of Israel is the only real God, and only He should be worshipped. But even some Israelites might have believed that other quote-unquote gods existed. They might just have thought that they were less powerful than their own God. So we're going to learn a lot more about this culture as we read this novel. Please come back on Saturday as we read chapters 4 through 6. Have a good night, everybody.